There is a photograph taken on the morning of October 13th, 1946, 3 days before it happened. It shows a group of American soldiers in short sleeves, mid-game, arms raised, sneakers squeaking on a polished floor. One is mid-jump, reaching for a basketball hoop mounted on a brick wall. The gymnasium at Nuremberg prison looks exactly like what it is. A room where young men come to run and sweat and argue over fouls. By the time that photograph was taken, the gallows were already being measured for the same room. 3 days later, on the 16th of October 1946, 10 men who had built the machinery of the Holocaust, the foreign minister, the field marshal, the man who ran the slave labor program, the architect of the Nazi racial state, were walked one at a time across that same basketball court and hanged. The whole thing took 103 minutes. What went on inside that room, and who was put in charge of doing it, is a stranger and more disturbing story than most accounts ever tell. The gymnasium sat in the courtyard of the Palace of Justice, 35 yards from the cell block where the condemned men had spent their final weeks. It was not large, roughly 80 feet long by 33 feet wide. The night before the executions, 3 black-painted wooden scaffolds were assembled inside it. 2 were positioned side by side for alternating use. A third stood in reserve against the far wall. Beside it, just out of sight behind a curtain, 11 wooden coffins were stacked and waiting. Each gallows had a platform 8 feet high, accessible by 13 steps. The trap door at the top was operated by a single lever. Below the platform, the interior was boarded on 3 sides with wood. The 4th side was covered with a dark canvas curtain, so that no witness could see into the space beneath the floor. Once a man dropped, all that remained visible was the rope, pulled taut, angled slightly, utterly still. The witnesses that night numbered around 25. They included military officers from the 4 Allied powers, a German Protestant chaplain, 2 Catholic priests, a doctor, and 4 journalists selected by lot to represent the world's press. One of them was Kingsbury Smith of the International News Service, whose eyewitness account remains the most detailed record of what happened in that room. The man at the top of the platform was Master Sergeant John C. Woods, 35 years old, from Wichita, Kansas. Woods had obtained the job by telling the Army he had 17 years of experience as a professional hangman in Texas and Oklahoma, with 347 executions to his name. There is no record that anyone ever verified this. The Army posted a call for volunteer executioners. Woods put his hand up, and that was enough. What the records do show is considerably less reassuring. Between 1944 and 1946, Woods had conducted or assisted with at least 11 executions of American servicemen convicted of murder and rape across France and Germany, and Army reports suggest a significant number of those had gone wrong. Ropes too short, deaths from strangulation rather than a broken neck. In one documented case in France, a condemned man had been left alive and struggling for nearly 20 minutes before the proceedings were finally concluded. There was, in fact, a man in the vicinity who genuinely knew what he was doing, Johann Baptist Reichhardt, a Bavarian who came from a family of executioners going back 8 generations, and who had personally killed 3,165 people during the Nazi period as Germany's state judicial executioner. Reichhardt had cooperated with Allied authorities since the end of the war, helping to execute over 150 convicted war criminals at Landsberg prison. He was consulted during the Nuremberg preparations, but on the night of October 16th, the man who climbed the 13 steps and adjusted the noose was John C. Woods. At 9:30 on the evening of October 15th, correspondents were permitted to inspect the cell block. Jodl was writing a letter. Von Ribbentrop was in earnest conversation with the Protestant chaplain. Sauckel paced his cell without stopping. Hermann Göring, the highest-ranking Nazi condemned to death, lay on his cot with his hands outside his blankets, apparently asleep. At 10:45, a guard noticed Göring twitching. By the time the doctor arrived, the death rattle was in his throat. Goering had bitten down on a glass capsule of potassium cyanide, a capsule that had been in his possession since his capture the previous year, or possibly smuggled to him in prison. The truth of how it got there has never been definitively established. His own suicide note explained that he carried the poison on his person throughout the entire duration of his imprisonment, that he had concealed it from his captors, and that he refused to die on the rope. He had asked to be executed by firing squad, a soldier's death. When the tribunal refused, he found another way. 2 hours before he was scheduled to be hanged, his body was carried to the gymnasium and placed on a stretcher between the two gallows, his bare feet protruding from under an army blanket, so that witnesses could confirm he was dead. The official count that night was 11. The room would see 10. Von Ribbentrop entered the gymnasium at 1:11 in the morning. He had been Hitler's foreign minister, the man who negotiated the pacts that opened the door for the invasion of Poland, and who had once arrived at Buckingham Palace and greeted the King of England with a Nazi salute. His hands were bound behind him with a leather strap. He walked steadily. When an officer asked his name at the foot of the gallows, he did not answer at first. Then, as though coming back from somewhere, he nearly shouted it. His last words, delivered in a firm voice from the top of the platform, called for understanding between East and West, and for peace. Then, the black hood came down, the lever was pulled, and he dropped. The procedure was designed for efficiency. The condemned men were brought in one at a time, but the next man was led through the gymnasium door while the previous one was still hanging. With two gallows alternating, the ropes never went cold. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel came next. He had been the second most senior officer in the German military, a man who, in the dock at Nuremberg, had tried at length to argue that he was merely following orders. On the scaffold, he made no such argument. He held his head up, walked with military bearing, and when asked for his final words, he called on God to have mercy on Germany, and declared that more than 2 million German soldiers had died before him. Witnesses agreed that Keitel showed more courage in those final seconds than he had shown during months of courtroom testimony. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who had run the Reich Security main office after Heydrich's assassination and overseen the machinery of the final solution, entered the chamber with what one witness described as pleading eyes. He cast a long look at the chaplain before the hood was placed over his head. Alfred Rosenberg, the ideological architect of Nazi racial theory, a man who had spent decades constructing the philosophical framework that justified mass murder, said nothing on the scaffold. No final words. He was the only one of the 10 who refused to speak. His avowed atheism did not prevent a Protestant chaplain from following him up the stairs and standing beside him, praying, as the lever was pulled. Hans Frank, who had governed occupied Poland and overseen the systematic killing of millions, entered the chamber with a smile on his face. He had converted to Catholicism during his imprisonment and asked God to receive him mercifully. Julius Streicher was the only one who made the witnesses flinch. He had published Der Stürmer, the virulently anti-Semitic newspaper that ran for 22 years and reached millions of readers. As a guard pushed him up the final steps, he shouted, "Heil Hitler!" When formally asked for his last words, he screamed that the Bolsheviks would hang everyone in the room one day. And then, while Woods was pulling the hood down, Streicher's voice dropped to almost nothing, and he said, "Adele, my dear wife." When the trap opened, Streicher went down kicking. The rope swung wildly. Witnesses heard groaning from behind the canvas curtain. Woods descended from the platform, lifted the curtain, and stepped inside. Abruptly, the sounds stopped. The army denied that any of the men had suffered unduly. Several of the journalists present concluded otherwise. Reports suggested some deaths had taken between 14 and 28 minutes. Post-execution photographs show that both Keitel and Frick had sustained head injuries when they struck the edges of the trap door on the way down. The opening had been built too small. The last man, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, limped to the gallows on a club foot at 2:38 in the morning. He wore glasses and had the look, one witness said, of someone blinking against a bright light. His final words called for peace between nations and said, "I believe in Germany." He dropped through the trap at 2:46 a.m. 103 minutes had elapsed since von Ribbentrop entered the room. The bodies were loaded onto 2 trucks before dawn, covered with tarpaulins, and driven south under armed escort. The crematorium at Munich's Ostfriedhof had been told to expect the remains of 14 American servicemen. No one who entered the building that day was permitted to leave. By evening, all 11, the 10 hanged men and Goering, had been cremated. The urns were smashed. The ashes were driven to a bridge over the Wenzbach, a small tributary of the river Isar, and poured into the water in darkness. The Allies were determined that there would be no burial site, no grave marker, no physical location that could become a place of pilgrimage. They had watched what happened when defeated movements were given relics to venerate. The basketball hoop was still mounted on the gymnasium wall when the last body was removed. The room was scrubbed. The scaffolds were dismantled and burned. John C. Woods returned to the United States, where he told the Sioux City Journal, 10 men in 103 minutes. That's fast work. He was electrocuted 4 years later in a separate accident at the nuclear test site on Eniwetok Atoll in the Pacific. He was 39 years old. The gymnasium at Nuremberg still stands.